Las Vegas is a city that promises excitement, fortune, and endless entertainment. The bright lights, the loud clinking of slot machines, and the constant hum of activity draw millions of visitors every year. But beneath the shiny surface, beyond the neon signs and glitzy casinos, Las Vegas holds a much darker and more unsettling side, one that few people ever get to see. This dark underbelly became painfully real to the residents of Las Vegas in the 1990s, when a young woman named Sarah disappeared without a trace, sending ripples through the community that would never quite fade away. Sarah was a local college student studying at one of the smaller universities near the famous Las Vegas Strip. She wasn't a stranger to the city. In fact, she was well known by the people who worked and lived in the area. She was friendly and outgoing, always greeting the bartenders and shopkeepers with a smile. Sarah's bright personality made her someone people remembered. She didn't have that celebrity status that some Las Vegas residents might carry, but in her own way, she had become part of the fabric of the city. She loved the excitement of the Strip and the freedom that came with being young in a city like Las Vegas. But in the summer of 1995, she became a part of something much darker, something that would linger in the shadows of the city for years. On the evening Sarah vanished, she had spent most of her day at the local university, and later met some friends at a casino for a drink. The casino was located along the Strip, and it was a bustling place, the kind of place that was always alive, no matter what hour it was. Sarah's friends said she had been in high spirits, laughing and chatting as they played blackjack and wandered around the casino floor. At some point during the night, she told her friends she was going to step outside for some fresh air. It wasn't unusual for her to take a walk on the Strip, especially when she needed a break from the noise of the casino. The Strip, after all, was a place of endless movement, and Sarah loved being part of the crowd, feeling the pulse of the city as it raced around her. She said goodbye to her friends, and that was the last anyone saw of her. Hours went by, and Sarah didn't return. Her friends assumed she'd met someone, or maybe she had just gotten caught up in the nightlife of the Strip. They didn't think too much of it, but as the hours stretched into the early morning, worry began to set in. Sarah wasn't the type to just disappear without telling anyone. By the time the sun began to rise, her friends realized something was wrong. They tried calling her phone, but there was no answer. As the day wore on, they contacted her family, and soon her disappearance was reported to the authorities. At first, the police weren't too concerned. Disappearances weren't unheard of in Las Vegas, especially in the bustling environment of the Strip. Some people wander off, get caught up in a night out, and lose track of time. It wasn't uncommon for young people to spend a night in the city and not return home until the next day or even the next week. But when Sarah's family began to worry, the police took a more serious look into the case. Her family described her as a responsible young woman who had never gone missing before. Sarah's friends all agreed that it wasn't like her to just vanish. They were certain something had happened. The authorities quickly began to investigate. They scoured the area around the casino, checking the nearby streets and alleyways. They asked casino employees if they had seen anything unusual. Security footage from the casino was pulled, but it didn't reveal anything that pointed to foul play. Sarah was last seen walking toward the street, her steps confident as she disappeared into the crowd. The footage showed no signs of struggle, and there was no indication that she had been grabbed or forced into a car. The police checked with local businesses, hoping someone might have seen something. But there were no witnesses who could provide any useful information. It was as if she had simply disappeared into thin air. Days passed, and the search intensified. Flyers with Sarah's photo were posted around the city, and news outlets began covering the story. But the longer it went without any solid leads, the more the case began to fade from the public's mind. The police followed up on a few promising tips, but none of them panned out. Her family, heartbroken and desperate, kept hoping that someone would come forward with new information. The feeling of helplessness grew with every passing day. Weeks turned into months, and the case grew cold. There was no sign of Sarah, and no explanation for what had happened to her. The police couldn't offer any answers, and her family was left to wonder if they would ever know the truth. What happened to Sarah on that fateful night? Was she taken by someone, or did she simply walk away? No one could say for sure. But what truly unnerved the residents of Las Vegas, what made this case stand out from others, was how quickly it seemed to be forgotten. It wasn't as though people didn't care. It wasn't that Sarah's disappearance was dismissed by the public. It was that, in the city of Las Vegas, things like this happened all the time. People came and went, and sometimes they vanished without explanation. There was always another headline, another tragedy, another mystery to focus on. But Sarah's case, which had initially shocked the city, was slowly swept under the rug. It wasn't long before people stopped talking about it. The casino, where Sarah had last been seen, went on with business as usual. The staff there still worked long hours, and the crowds kept pouring in, oblivious to the young woman who had vanished. Even her friends, who had been so concerned in the beginning, gradually moved on with their lives. They found themselves remembering Sarah less and less. It was as if she had never existed at all. But there were those who couldn't forget. A few of Sarah's closest friends couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that Sarah had been the victim of something much more sinister than just a night out gone wrong. There were rumors, whispers behind closed doors. Some said Sarah had been involved in something dangerous, something she shouldn't have been. Others claimed that the authorities had covered up the truth, that they knew more than they were letting on. The police, despite their best efforts, never found any concrete evidence. And after months of fruitless searching, they quietly closed the case, labeling it as an unsolved missing persons case. Would the truth ever come to light, or would it remain buried in the dark corners of Las Vegas? A mystery that would never be solved. A few months had passed since Sarah's disappearance, and the case had slowly slipped into the background of Las Vegas's bustling nightlife. Its once prominent place in the news fading into the shadows. But deep within the heart of the city, at one of the Strip's most luxurious hotels, something sinister was beginning to unfold. It was there that Maria, a maid who worked at the hotel, would stumble upon something that would rekindle the questions surrounding Sarah's case and bring to light a terrifying mystery that no one had been brave enough to confront. Maria had worked at the hotel for several years. She was used to cleaning the suites, making beds, and ensuring everything was perfect for the guests. The hotel was one of the finest on the Strip, a place where the rich and famous came to stay when they visited Las Vegas. With its golden chandeliers and glittering decor, it was the epitome of luxury. But as much as Maria loved her job, she always felt something uneasy about certain rooms. Rooms that seemed too quiet, too perfect. And there was one room in particular that always gave her a strange feeling. A room on the 10th floor, tucked away in a corner of the hotel. It was an unremarkable room by most standards. A deluxe suite, decorated with high-end furnishings, a large window overlooking the neon lights of the Strip, and a private balcony. But what made it different, Maria soon discovered, was what she found tucked behind the bed one day while cleaning: a bloody towel. At first, Maria thought it was a mistake. A guest had probably cut themselves, maybe an accident in the bathroom, she reasoned. But as she picked up the towel, her hands trembling slightly, she noticed something that didn't sit right. The towel was folded carefully, almost too neatly, and the blood was fresh, not dried, like it had been there for days. It was as though someone had intentionally hidden it, as if they were trying to keep it from being found. Maria's heart raced as she glanced around the room. There was no sign of struggle, no broken furniture, no signs of anyone being injured or fighting. Yet the blood was undeniable. She looked under the bed, hoping to find an explanation. Perhaps a guest had left in a hurry, or there was some kind of spill she hadn't noticed before. But there was nothing, just the polished floors and the faint scent of expensive perfume. Maria knew something wasn't right, but she also knew it wasn't her job to investigate. She was just a maid, after all. Still, the image of the blood-stained towel lingered in her mind, gnawing at her. Why would someone hide it like that? What had happened in this room? Her curiosity couldn't be ignored, and after a moment of hesitation, Maria decided to report the incident to her supervisor. She nervously approached him, her voice shaky as she explained what she had found. "I think there's something wrong with room 1015, she said, her eyes wide with unease. "I found a bloody towel behind the bed. It looks fresh." Her supervisor, a middle-aged man named Frank, raised an eyebrow but didn't seem too concerned. "A bloody towel? Are you sure, Maria? Maybe it's just some sort of accident." Maria nodded, but she could tell that Frank wasn't taking her seriously. "I know it sounds strange, but it doesn't feel right. I've worked here for years, and I've never seen anything like this. The blood, it wasn't old. It was still wet." Frank gave a dismissive wave. "Look, just go back and finish your shift. I'll send someone to check the room. I'm sure it's nothing." Ria returned to the room, but the unease never left her. When the staff went to check the suite, they didn't find anything out of the ordinary. The bed was made, the bathroom was spotless, and the room was in perfect condition. There was no sign of a struggle or any sort of disturbance. The towel, however, had been removed. There was nothing left to suggest that anything had happened there. Frank assured Maria that everything was fine, but the knot in her stomach only tightened. She couldn't shake the feeling that something was being covered up. A few days passed, but the strange feeling in Maria's gut never left. She tried to put it out of her mind, but every time she passed by room 1015, she couldn't help but glance nervously at the door. Her thoughts kept drifting back to Sarah's disappearance. Was there a connection? Was Sarah somehow tied to the strange events that had started to unfold within the hotel? the whispers from other hotel staff only added to her growing paranoia. Maria, however, couldn't ignore her instincts. She couldn't let the thought of the bloody towel slip away, especially when her gut told her that something was off about the whole situation. But when she tried to talk to the police about her discovery, they brushed her off just as easily as Frank had. "It's just a towel, Maria. Don't worry about it," they told her, as if the blood had no significance. The hotel was a busy place, and no one wanted to make a fuss. Maria was told to focus on her job and forget about the towel, but that was easier said than done. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that no one was interested in finding out what had really happened. The hotel, the police, even her colleagues, everyone was more concerned with keeping things quiet. It was as if someone didn't want the truth to come out. But Maria couldn't let it go. Every time she passed the 10th floor, her eyes would be drawn to that room, to the memory of the blood-stained towel that no one seemed to care about. Something was hidden there, something dark and dangerous. And Maria couldn't shake the feeling that she had seen a glimpse of it. A glimpse of the evil lurking just beneath the surface of Las Vegas's shiny exterior. She began to ask around, quietly questioning other staff members about the room and the strange things she had noticed. She heard rumors about a guest who had stayed in room 1015 just before the towel was found. A man who had left suddenly, without a trace. No one knew exactly who he was, and no one seemed to remember much about his stay. But one thing was certain. He had checked in under a false name. Maria's curiosity only deepened, and her obsession with uncovering the truth began to grow. But the more she searched for answers, the more she felt the hotel's walls closing in around her. It was clear that someone, perhaps many someones, didn't want her to uncover the secrets hidden within the hotel. And as the whispers continued, Maria couldn't help but wonder if she was just scratching the surface of a much larger and more terrifying mystery than she had ever imagined. A few weeks after the disturbing discovery in room 1015, Maria started to notice something even more unsettling. There was a man who began to appear at the hotel. At first, he seemed harmless enough, just another face in the crowded world of Las Vegas. But as the days went by, Maria couldn't shake the feeling that he wasn't just any guest. He was different. He was out of place in a way that she couldn't quite put into words. He was tall and thin, with pale skin that seemed to almost glow under the hotel's bright lights. His features were sharp, almost too perfect, like someone who didn't quite belong in the chaotic world of Vegas. He had a coldness about him that made her uneasy, as if he were always watching, always observing, but never truly engaging. His eyes were distant, vacant, as if they could see right through her and everyone else in the room. At first, Maria thought he might just be a regular guest, maybe a tourist who didn't quite fit the typical mold of the Strip's clientele. But the more she saw him, the more she became convinced that something about him didn't add up. He didn't seem interested in the usual things most guests were. No fascination with the slot machines or the glamorous shows that Vegas was known for. He never spent much time in the casino or the bars. Instead, he would wander the halls of the hotel, always staying in the shadows, always keeping a distance from the other guests and employees. He started to appear more frequently, almost always in the same places, walking down the same hallways, sitting in the same quiet corners of the lobby. Maria noticed that he never interacted with anyone. He didn't smile at the staff or greet the other guests. He just walked, his eyes scanning the people around him, his steps deliberate and purposeful. He seemed to be looking for something or someone. Maria couldn't help but feel that he was watching her too, as though he knew she had noticed him. His cold gaze would follow her when she passed, never blinking, never turning away. It was as if he was studying her every movement, analyzing her in a way that made her skin crawl. One night, while cleaning a room on the 9th floor, Maria saw him again. He was standing near the elevator, his back to the wall, looking out over the busy hotel lobby. His face was unreadable, his posture stiff and rigid. Maria's curiosity got the better of her, and she found herself staring at him from across the hall. She couldn't help but wonder who he was and why he always seemed so out of place. There was something about him, something that connected him to the strange events surrounding Sarah's disappearance. He didn't belong here, and that instinct inside her told her he had something to do with it. Maria's heart pounded as she realized that the feeling she had been ignoring for so long was not just paranoia. It was the truth. The man was connected to Sarah. She was sure of it. Determined to find out more, Maria decided that night would be the night she followed him. It wasn't easy. She had to make sure she wasn't seen, staying far enough behind him to avoid detection, but close enough to keep him in sight. She waited until the man had disappeared down the hallway, then slipped quietly into the shadows, staying out of his line of sight. She followed him down the narrow corridors, her footsteps barely audible on the plush carpet. He moved with purpose, walking at a steady pace, his eyes scanning the surroundings. She could feel the tension building in her chest as she watched him carefully, wondering what he was up to and where he was going. Maria's breath quickened as they reached an area of the hotel she had never been before. It was an old, unused part of the building, dimly lit and far away from the bustling heart of the hotel. The hallway was eerily quiet, the kind of quiet that made Maria's skin crawl. The walls were cracked and faded, and the floors creaked underfoot, a far cry from the pristine, polished elegance of the hotel's main areas. The man didn't hesitate. He walked straight through the hallway, as though he knew exactly where he was going. Maria stayed as silent as possible, trailing behind him, trying not to make a sound. At the end of the hall, the man stopped in front of a door. He didn't knock, didn't hesitate. He simply entered the room, the door creaking open as he stepped inside. Maria's heart raced in her chest as she crept closer to the door, trying to listen in. She held her breath, trying to stay as quiet as possible. She had to know what he was doing, had to know if he was really involved in Sarah's disappearance. What she heard next sent a chill down her spine. The man was talking, but his voice was low, almost a whisper. He was speaking to someone inside the room, someone Maria couldn't see. But the words were clear, and they froze her in place. She was never supposed to leave the hotel alive, the man said. His voice was cold, emotionless, as though he was stating a fact, not revealing a secret. Maria's heart skipped a beat. He was talking about Sarah. She felt a wave of nausea hit her stomach. The man knew something. He knew something about Sarah's disappearance. Something that no one else did. She had to know more. She leaned in closer to the door, her hands trembling, desperate to hear more. But before she could gather herself, the man suddenly stopped talking. Maria's breath caught in her throat as she heard footsteps approaching the door. Her heart pounded in her chest, and for a brief moment she considered running. But it was too late. The door swung open and the man stepped out, his cold eyes meeting Maria's. For a moment, neither of them moved. Maria was frozen in place, her body stiff with fear. The man didn't say a word. He just stared at her, his gaze piercing through her like a sharp knife. His eyes were like empty pits, devoid of any warmth or humanity. There was no emotion in his face, no surprise that she had been eavesdropping. It was as if he had known she was there all along. Maria's blood ran cold as he stepped toward her, his pace slow and deliberate. She took a step back, but her feet felt like they were glued to the floor. The man's gaze never wavered. his eyes never blinking, never looking away. His presence was suffocating, like a heavy weight pressing down on her chest. Without saying a word, the man moved closer, his expression unreadable. Maria didn't know what to do. She was terrified, but she couldn't look away from him. She felt trapped, as though she were caught in a web with no way out. And then, without warning, the man turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows of the hotel once again. Maria stood there, her heart racing, her mind spinning. She had just overheard something she shouldn't have heard, something that was going to change everything. Maria's legs shook as she turned and fled the scene, her pulse pounding in her ears. She ran down the hallway, through the empty corridors, not stopping until she was back in the safety of the hotel's main area. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts and questions. Who was that man? What had he meant by what he said? And why had he known she was there? As she tried to collect her thoughts, one thing was clear. Maria had uncovered something. She didn't know what or how deep it went, but she knew it was connected to Sarah's disappearance. She had found a thread, and now there was no turning back. Maria's mind raced with questions and suspicions, the weight of the discoveries she had already made weighing heavily on her shoulders. The man she had followed, the strange whispers, the chilling conversation she overheard, it all pointed to something far darker than she could have ever imagined. Her instincts told her that she was getting closer to the truth, but every time she dug deeper, more obstacles seemed to appear. And the hotel's secrets seemed to tighten around her like a noose. She knew she couldn't do it alone anymore. She needed help. Maria had a few friends who worked at other hotels along the Strip. They didn't work in the same hotel as she did, but they were all part of the same tight-knit community of hospitality workers. It was a tough industry, but there was an unspoken camaraderie among those who worked behind the scenes. They shared tips, stories, and sometimes secrets. Maria knew she could trust them. So one evening, after her shift had ended, she called a few of them to meet up at a small cafe just off the Strip. She needed their help to unravel the mystery that had haunted her for weeks. She needed answers. They met in a corner booth, and Maria immediately got to the point. She told them everything. The strange towel she had found, the eerie conversations she had overheard, the man who seemed to be watching her. Her friends listened intently, their faces reflecting the same unease that Maria had felt from the start. They all knew something was off about the hotel, but Maria's discoveries had confirmed their suspicions. There was something deeply wrong, something hidden in the shadows. And it wasn't just the staff who were ignoring it. It seemed as though the entire hotel, even the city itself, was trying to bury it. Maria's friends were willing to help, and together they began to dig through the hotel's records. They knew that it would take some time. Hotel systems were complicated, and there were layers of bureaucracy involved in every booking. But they were determined. They began by looking at the older records, hoping to uncover something useful. They spent hours combing through stacks of papers and digital files, until finally, they came across something that made Maria's blood run cold. There was a room in the hotel that had been marked unavailable for years. No one was allowed to go in, and the booking system showed no indication of why. It was a room that had been kept off limits to most employees. The more they dug, the more they realized that no one could remember the last time the room had been used. In fact, the records were sketchy, and there was almost no documentation on who had stayed there or when. It was as though the room didn't even exist in the official records of the hotel, a room shrouded in mystery. The deeper they dug, the more questions began to surface. Why was this room kept hidden? And why had it been locked away for so long? After hours of searching through old files, Maria's friend Marco, who had worked in the hotel's IT department for years, found something truly chilling. The room, according to the system, had been used recently, very recently. In fact, the last time it was booked was the very night Sarah disappeared. Maria's heart skipped a beat. This wasn't a coincidence. She had suspected that the hotel's secrets were connected to Sarah's disappearance, and now she had proof. The room had been booked under a fake name, and the records showed nothing more than a vague entry. Just a few cryptic numbers and letters. No clear identification of who had checked in. But one thing was certain. The booking was made for the night Sarah vanished. Maria felt a wave of nausea wash over her. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. It all made sense now. Sarah had been there. She had been in the hotel, possibly even in that very room. But why? And who had made the reservation under a false name? The unanswered questions flooded her mind, but there was one more detail that chilled her to the bone. According to the records, the room had been cleaned shortly after the booking. But when Maria's friend Lana, who had worked in housekeeping at the hotel for years, checked the room's cleaning logs, she found a disturbing detail. The last cleaning had been done by a different employee, one who wasn't normally assigned to that part of the hotel. The logs didn't match up with the usual procedures, and there was a gap in the cleaning records that no one could explain. It was as though someone had purposefully erased the details, as if they didn't want anyone to know what had happened in that room. Still, Maria knew she needed more. She couldn't just rely on the records. She had to see the room for herself. So, with the help of her friends, Maria snuck into the hotel's restricted areas late one night. They knew the risks. They were violating hotel policy, and if anyone found out, they could lose their jobs. But Maria's need for answers outweighed the fear. They made their way through the back hallways, using a set of keys that Maria had secretly borrowed from one of the maintenance workers. The hotel was quiet that night, the guests tucked away in their rooms, and the staff busy with the final rounds of the evening shift. It was the perfect opportunity to get in undetected. As they approached the door to the secret room, Maria's pulse quickened. She felt a strange sense of foreboding as she reached for the handle, her fingers trembling. The door creaked open, and the group stepped inside, the stale air inside the room almost suffocating. The room was small, dimly lit, and filled with a strange, heavy silence. Everything about it felt wrong. The walls were bare, the furniture old and covered in dust, and there was an oppressive feeling in the air that made Maria's skin crawl. It was a room that hadn't been touched in years, and yet it felt as though it had been used recently. Maria moved cautiously, her heart pounding in her chest. She was looking for anything that could tell her what had happened here. Anything that might link this room to Sarah's disappearance. As she moved toward the small, unkempt bed, she froze. There, in the corner of the room, she saw something that made her stomach turn. It was a towel, folded neatly and placed on top of the trash bin. The same bloody towel that Maria had found in room 1015 all those weeks ago. Her hands shook as she reached down to pick it up. The blood was still fresh, though it had been weeks since the towel had been placed in the trash. There was no doubt in her mind now. Sarah had been in this room. The towel was proof. But the question remained, who had brought her here? And what had happened to her in this room? Maria felt a wave of dizziness wash over her as the reality of the situation set in. The hotel had tried to cover up what had happened. It was clear now that something terrible had taken place, something that the staff, the police, and even the hotel's management had all worked to conceal. But Maria wasn't going to stop now. She had uncovered something far deeper than she had ever anticipated, and she was determined to find out the truth, no matter the cost. She looked around the room one last time, her mind racing with possibilities. It was too late to turn back now. The secrets of this room had been hidden for too long, and Maria knew she couldn't rest until she uncovered the full extent of what had happened there. There was no turning back. The truth was just within reach, and Maria was determined to find it. Maria couldn't sleep. The heavy weight of everything she had uncovered in the past few weeks kept her up at night. Every time she closed her eyes, the images haunted her. The bloody towel, the hidden room, the strange man with the cold eyes, and the realization that the hotel wasn't just hiding something. It was protecting someone. Someone powerful enough to manipulate the system, to make the truth disappear as if it had never existed. But Maria couldn't stop herself. She was too deep into this mystery now, and she couldn't turn back. The questions burned in her mind, and every answer she uncovered only led to more terrifying revelations. Sarah was at the center of it all, and somehow Maria knew she had to keep digging, even if it meant putting herself in greater danger. The more she dug, the more she realized that the hotel, the people working there, and the authorities were all part of something much bigger than she could have ever imagined. They weren't just trying to cover up a murder. They were protecting a secret. A powerful secret that no one was supposed to know. Each time she tried to confront someone, to get answers from the police or the hotel's management, they ignored her, brushing off her concerns as nothing more than paranoia. They told her to focus on her job and leave the investigation to the professionals. But Maria wasn't one to back down easily. She had seen enough to know that there was something much more sinister going on. Something that no one wanted to talk about. Soon, Maria began to feel it. The unsettling sensation that she was being watched. It started subtly at first. Just a flicker of movement out of the corner of her eye. Or a shadow that seemed to linger longer than it should. At first, she brushed it off as her imagination running wild, the result of stress and exhaustion. But the feeling grew stronger. She couldn't shake the idea that someone was following her, that someone was always just behind her, watching her every move. The hotel, with its long hallways and hidden corners, had a way of making you feel like you were never truly alone. And the more she dug into its secrets, the more that feeling grew, gnawing at her from the inside. One night, as Maria worked the night shift, the oppressive feeling reached its peak. The hotel was eerily quiet. The only sound, the faint hum of the air conditioning and the distant echoes of footsteps from the occasional passing guest. Maria had grown accustomed to the silence. But tonight, something was different. The atmosphere felt heavy, suffocating, as if the air itself was thick with tension. She was cleaning the lobby area when she first heard it. Low, hushed whispers coming from the hallway. It wasn't the usual noise from guests passing by. and it didn't sound like a conversation. The voices were almost inaudible, too soft for her to make out the words. But they were there, quiet and persistent. Her curiosity got the better of her, and she followed the sound, drawn to it, unable to resist the pull. The whispers led her to a part of the hotel she hadn't visited in months. The same abandoned section where the hidden room lay. The hall was dimly lit, the lights flickering in the distance, casting long shadows that seemed to dance on the walls. The air felt colder here, the chill seeping into her bones. She stopped at the entrance to the hallway, her heart pounding in her chest. The whispers were louder now, almost urgent, but there was something else in the air, something she couldn't quite place, something that made her blood run cold. She felt it before she saw it, the unmistakable sensation of eyes on her. She wasn't alone. Maria's breath caught in her throat as she stepped forward, each step feeling heavier than the last. As she rounded the corner of the hallway, she froze. The door to the secret room, the very room she had discovered days earlier, was wide open. The faint light from the hallway illuminated the darkness inside, casting long shadows on the floor. For a moment, Maria hesitated, unsure of what to do. Her instincts screamed at her to turn back, to walk away before it was too late. But the whispers, the eerie pull, urged her forward. She couldn't stop herself. Her pulse raced as she approached the door, her footsteps silent on the cold floor. The whispers grew louder now, almost frantic, as if they were calling to her, begging her to come closer. She reached the door, her hand trembling as she pushed it open. The room was empty, but not in the way she expected. There was something inside, a figure, standing motionless in the center of the room, bathed in the pale light. Maria's breath hitched in her chest as she recognized the figure. It was Sarah. She stood there, thin and pale, her once beautiful features now gaunt and hollow. Her eyes were vacant, lifeless, like those of a ghost. Her skin was ashen, her clothes torn and dirty, as though she had been wandering for days, trapped in a nightmare she couldn't escape. Maria's heart twisted with pity and fear as she took a step forward, her mind racing with 1,000 questions. What had happened to Sarah? How had she ended up here? The room seemed to close in around her, the air thick with an oppressive silence that made it hard to breathe. Sarah didn't move. Her eyes remained fixed on Maria, her gaze vacant and distant, as if she were staring through her rather than at her. The room seemed to grow colder, and the shadows lengthened, as though the very walls were closing in. Maria's feet felt frozen to the floor, her mind struggling to process what she was seeing. She wanted to run, to get away from this nightmare. But she couldn't tear herself away. Then Sarah's lips parted, and her voice, thin and raspy, whispered one word: "Help me." Maria's breath caught in her throat. She took another step forward, her heart aching for Sarah, for the poor girl who had been trapped in this nightmare. She had to do something. She couldn't just stand there and watch Sarah suffer. But as she moved toward the figure, something terrible happened. Without warning, the door slammed shut behind her with a deafening crash. Maria whipped around, her heart racing in her chest, but the door was already locked. She couldn't see anything through the small window on the door, and she knew that she was trapped. Panic surged through her as she banged on the door, shouting for help, but there was no response. The hotel was still, the silence suffocating. She was alone with Sarah, or what was left of her. The temperature in the room dropped even further, and Maria could see her breath as she exhaled. The walls seemed to close in on her, the shadows growing darker, the whispers louder. Sarah's figure remained unmoving in the corner, her eyes never leaving Maria's. Maria's mind raced, her body trembling with fear and uncertainty. She had to find a way out, but she couldn't escape. Not now. Not with Sarah's pleading eyes fixed on her. Not with the hotel's secrets closing in around her. There was no turning back. Maria had stumbled too far into the darkness, and now there was no way out. Maria was never seen again. The night she vanished, there were no witnesses, no signs of a struggle, and no trace left behind. The hotel, as usual, continued its operations, moving forward as if nothing had ever happened. Her disappearance was like another forgotten chapter in the history of that dark, haunted building. Some people in the hotel's underbelly whispered that she had been taken by the same malevolent force that had taken Sarah, as if the hotel itself had claimed her as one of its many lost souls. Others believed that Maria had gotten too close to uncovering the truth about Sarah's disappearance, the hidden room, and the sinister network that seemed to pull the strings behind the scenes. Those who dared to ask too many questions, who dug too deep into the hotel's secrets, simply disappeared. Rumors about Maria's fate spread like wildfire through the staff and the locals who worked in and around the strip. The whispers grew louder with every passing day. Some said Maria had been silenced, her body hidden away, to keep the truth from ever coming to light. Others believed she had become a part of the hotel's twisted story, just another victim in a long line of unexplained disappearances. No one knew for sure, and perhaps that was the most terrifying part. The mystery surrounding her disappearance became another puzzle that no one had the answers to. Just another layer in the growing enigma of the hotel's dark past. As for the police, they couldn't be bothered to investigate any further. They had already closed the case on Sarah's disappearance, brushing it off as a tragic accident or a runaway case. And Maria's sudden disappearance was conveniently ignored. The authorities had bigger problems to deal with, or so they claimed. The hotel itself, of course, played its part in keeping everything under wraps, ensuring that no one would ever ask too many questions or dig too deep into the secrets that festered behind the ornate walls. After all, the hotel was a business, and a business had to keep running smoothly. The darker side of Las Vegas, the crime, the corruption, the strange disappearances, was just another part of the city's pulse, a part of its mystique that tourists flock to every year, unaware of the true horrors lurking in the shadows. As the months passed, the hotel continued its operations as if Maria had never existed. The guests came and went, the staff worked their shifts, and the city of Las Vegas moved forward, unshaken by the strange happenings that had occurred within the hotel's walls. But for those who worked behind the scenes, the hotel had taken on an almost supernatural quality. People talked in hushed tones about the eerie things they had witnessed. Objects moving on their own. Strange noises echoing through the hallways at night. The sense that something was watching them when no one else was around. Many staff members had felt it too. The cold, oppressive presence that seemed to seep from the walls. The feeling of being watched, as though they were never truly alone. Even the locals, who had seen the city's most bizarre and dangerous happenings, spoke of the hotel in fearful whispers. Some said that they had heard the sound of footsteps in empty corridors, the sound of doors creaking open late at night when no one was around. Others claimed to hear faint whispers calling their names, soft voices that echoed through the hallways, pleading for help. The whispers, some said, belonged to Sarah. She had never left the hotel. Her ghost lingered, trapped in the building for eternity, calling out for someone to hear her story, for someone to finally uncover the truth of what had happened to her. And then there were the more chilling stories. The stories of guests who stayed too long in the hotel and began to feel a strange, inexplicable presence. They would feel cold fingers brush against their skin in the dead of night, or catch glimpses of a pale figure standing at the foot of their bed, only to find the room empty when they looked again. It wasn't just the staff and the locals who felt the hotel's eerie pull. Tourists, too, began to experience unsettling things. Some reported feeling a sudden, oppressive weight on their chest when they entered certain rooms, as though they were being watched by unseen eyes. Others claimed to have heard strange noises in the night. Whispers, the sound of someone calling their name, or footsteps echoing in the halls. Despite the hotel being empty, there were even rumors of guests who checked in and never checked out. Their luggage left behind, their rooms undisturbed. The hotel became known not only for its luxury, but for its sinister, haunted reputation. One that kept guests coming back, even as they whispered about the things they had seen or heard during their stays. Despite all the rumors and the stories, the hotel's management continued to deny any connection to the strange happenings. They had their public image to maintain, and they weren't about to let a few eerie tales ruin their business. The murder that was never exposed, the disappearances that went uninvestigated, these were just the shadows that clung to the edges of the hotel's glittering facade. But beneath the surface, a dark truth still simmered, waiting to be uncovered by someone brave enough to dig too deep. But as time passed, it became clear that no one would ever uncover that truth. The hotel's secrets, the dark things that it had buried, were too well hidden. The whispers of Sarah's ghost, the cold sensation that gripped guests and staff alike, would continue to haunt the building forever. There would always be new faces passing through the hotel, oblivious to the horrors that lay just beneath the surface, unaware that they were walking through the remains of a long-forgotten tragedy. And Maria, her name slowly faded from the memories of those who had known her. She became another name on a list of mysteries that no one cared to solve. She had vanished into the night, just like Sarah, and no one had the courage or the will to ask the questions that needed to be asked. The hotel moved on, and life in Las Vegas continued as it always had, with the flashing lights of the Strip casting their bright glow over a city that never slept. But beneath those lights, behind the glitzy hotels and the neon signs, the truth remained buried, hidden in the shadows, too terrifying to be revealed. To this day, locals and tourists alike still talk about the haunting of that hotel. The stories are whispered in dark corners, shared between friends, or passed along to newcomers who listen with a mix of curiosity and disbelief. Some claim to have felt the chill in the air, the sensation of being watched, while others swear they've heard the whispers, the soft, pleading voice of Sarah, still trapped in the hotel's endless corridors, crying out for help. And maybe, just maybe, if you stay too long in the hotel, you'll feel it too. The cold breath of something or someone watching you from the darkness. The murder that was never exposed remains one of the most disturbing mysteries Las Vegas has ever known. The hotel still stands, its doors open to the public, its lights still blazing, its corridors still filled with the hum of activity. But for those who know the stories, for those who have heard the whispers, the truth is clear. Some secrets are too terrifying to be revealed, and some ghosts are too powerful to be set free.